child selling is the practice of selling children, usually by parents, close persons, or subsequent masters or custodians. After a sale, when the subsequent relationship with the child is essentially non-exploitative, the usual purpose of child selling is to permit adoption. United States, Georgia Tan, of Memphis, Tennessee, was employed by the Tennessee Children's Home Society. According to reporter Barbara Bison's Raymond, Tan, in 1924–1950, stole many children and sold 5,000 children, most or all of them white. The children were adopted by families in exchange for substantial fees and processed the adoptions without investigating adoptive parents except for their wealth. Amounts charged for adoptions ranged from $700 to $10,000 when reputable agencies charged almost nothing. Tan, in a 1944 speech accusing others of unlicensed adoption placements, did not admit selling children herself. According to Raymond, Tan made adoption socially acceptable. Previously, when the first U.S. state adoption law was passed in 1851, adoption was not immediately popular. Early in the 20th century, adoption was rare. Low-income birth parents from whom children were taken were generally considered genetically inferior, and the children, considered adoptable, were considered therefore genetically tainted. Before Tan's work, indenture was applied to some children with the duties to educate the children and to provide them with land scarcely enforced, and the Orphan Train Project gathered children and transported them for resettlement under farmers needing labor, using a procedure akin to a slave auction. Some children's custody was changed through secretive means between sets of parents, some willing and some unaware. Baby farms, where many children were murdered, sold children for up to $100 each. Tan, apparently disagreeing with the prevailing view, argued that children were blank slates, thus free of the sin and genetic defects attributable to their parents, thus making adoption appealing, thus providing a way for children who might otherwise have been dead to survive and receive care. Her waiting lists including much of the U.S., Canada, and South America. One person adopted through the Tennessee Children's Home Society was wrestler Ric Flair. Brokers who sold babies were found in Augusta, Georgia, and Wichita, Kansas. A sale by a midwife occurred in New Orleans, Louisiana. A child was sold twice on one train ride, and one father traded his unborn daughter for a poker debt. In 1955–1956, passage of U.S. federal legislation to ban baby selling failed. Philosophical background. The libertarian U.S. economist Murray Rothbard wrote in his book Ethics of Liberty, that parents should have the right to put a child out for adoption or sell the rights to the child in a voluntary contract. Rothbard suggested selling children as consumer goods in accordance with market forces, would benefit everyone involved in the market, the natural parents, the children, and the foster parents. In Rothbard's view, the parent should not have a legal obligation to feed, clothe, or educate his children, since such obligations would entail positive acts coerced upon the parent and depriving the parent of his rights. Thus, parents should have the legal right to let any infant die by starvation. However, since the purely free society will have a flourishing free market in children, he wrote, the existence of a free baby market will bring such neglect down to a minimum. Cambodian children to the U.S. In 1997–2001, Lauren Galindo made $8 million by arranging 800 adoptions of Cambodian children by unwitting Americans, one being Angelina Jolie. For Galindo, baby buyers, often taxi drivers and orphanage managers, offered low-income mothers money or rice for children, whom Galindo claimed were orphans and for whom adopting families paid around $11,000 in fees. Galindo, saying she intended to save children from desperate circumstances, and that she felt she acted with the highest integrity, was convicted in the U.S. and sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. United Kingdom, Lawrence Stone reported some attempted sales of children accompanying wives sold by husbands to new husbands, one in 1815 and another discussed in 1763. Historian E. P. Thompson reported a sale of 2 children with a sale of a wife to an American in 1865 for £25 per child. In atypical cases, a wife and 4 children were sold for $1 each, apparently to preclude an expulsion to be forced by poor law officials, and a wife and child, born after she started living with her lover but before the sale, were sold. In another case, a wife and baby about a year old were sold at an auction, where the selling husband said, "See, I'm on wi' your bids, and if ye gies me a good price for the human, I'll gie ye the young kid inter the bargain. I'll tell thee what, Jack. If thou'rt mak it up 3 gallons o' drink, her's thine, I'll ax thee naught for the babby, and the halter's worth a quart. Come, say shillings." In various cases, when wife sales split families, it appears that the youngest children go with mothers and older children go with fathers. Procedures for selling children were often like those for selling wives when they relied on the contractual method, even if the contract was not legally enforceable. Ireland, in 964, there was a great and insufferable famine in which men sold their sons and daughters into slavery in return for food. The practice of selling children is referred to in 1116 and they were usually sold into areas remote from their homes. China. According to Frank Dekar paragraph TTER, in 1953 or 1954, when there was starvation, across the country people sold their children, and a 1950 report by the Chinese Communist Party on Shanghai deplored the sale of children due to joblessness, and, Dekar paragraph TTER continued, sale of children by many of the unemployed also occurred in South China, near Changchun. Some families sold their children. In 1953 during a famine in some provinces desperate parents even bartered their children, and one price in 1950 €53 in Nanny County was a handful of grain, another price in 1953 or 1954 having been 50 yuan, enough for the father to buy rice to last through a famine. According to a 2006 report, low-income families and unwed mothers sell babies, often girls, in the underground markets in China, and the sales are to parents who want servants, more children, or future brides for sons. Relatively few Chinese brokers are caught and prosecuted. According to a September 23, 2007 English newspaper report, in China, 190 children were snatched every day, but the Chinese government did not acknowledge the extent of the problem or the cause of the problem. According to a January 22, 2013 English-language Chinese newspaper report, Chen Shaik, director of the Chinese Ministry of Public Security's Human Trafficking Task Force, said that since a DNA database started in April 2009 it has matched 2,348 children with their biological parents. Zhang Bowen, founder of the Baby Back Home non-government organization, said the database is the most effective way to reunite families. Baby Back Home receives an average of 50 inquiries a day from abducted children and their parents. Baby Back Home gives blood samples to the ministry for DNA testing. However, Zhang Bowen, founder of Baby Back Home, said that there are still some parents of missing children who have no idea about the DNA database. A January 26, 2013 English news magazine report describes Xiao Kaiyue, a campaigning parent of an abducted child, as believing that the authorities could be doing a lot more. Mr. Xiao says that buyers of abducted children still often get away without punishment. They usually live in villages and sometimes enjoy protection from local officials. He says orphanages sometimes fail to take DNA from children they receive. Malaysia. In 2005 in Malaysia, baby selling rings were believed by some to be thriving, although this activity was still considered criminal. Other cultures and worldwide, in Greece, babies of young women are sometimes sold to adoptive parents before their mothers even leave the hospital. In 2007, brokering was being investigated by Interpol in Greece. Worldwide, in modern years, according to reporter Barbara Bisons-Raymond, brokers steal and sell children. In France, Italy, and Portugal, in 2007, brokering was being investigated by Interpol. International law. One proposal is the Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption, a treaty which would ban child buying. Popular culture, Stolen Babies, a cable TV movie starring Mary Tyler Moore, Mommy Dearest. Joan Crawford, S. Mommy Dearest daughter supposedly came from the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Donna Troy, In comic book fiction, in Pete's Dragon, a Disney movie released in 1977, Pete, the title character, was found to have been sold to the Gogans, an uneducated family, who used him as cheap labor until he ran away. In Oliver Twist, Mr. Bumble sold Oliver to an undertaker. Notes. See also, child laundering, husband selling, human trafficking, international adoption, international child abduction, list of international adoption scandals, trafficking of children, wife selling. References